But the other theme we've been exploring the past several weeks has been the importance of honoring our embodied natures, honoring our bodies in our lives of faith and in our spiritual practices. So it's not, in fact, true, for the record, that the goal of Christian prayer and practice is to somehow evaporate off or to somehow get beamed up into the ethers as disembodied souls. Rather, according to the best of Christian theology, it's about the union of body and soul, of heaven and earth. In the words of Karl Barth, who is a theologian, we are embodied souls and ensouled bodies. So this isn't about separation, it's about union. Embodied souls and ensouled bodies. So the way of Jesus is incarnational. It's about the in the fleshness. That's what incarnation means. In the flesh. The in the fleshness of the divine. And what that means for how we should try to live together. It's more about the on the earth as in heaven, on the earth as it is in heaven. It's more about that than it's about pie in the sky when you die. So a few weeks ago, I shared about how important it is to honor our bodies in our prayer lives. Again, prayer doesn't need to just be about somehow trying to beam up or evaporate off, but it's deeply enriching to explore postures and movements that our bodies can take that can help us to express in prayer, through prayer, things like awe and gratitude and reverence and need and grief and joy and serenity and so on. All these modes of being that happen when we sincerely put ourselves into relationship with the divine. And last week I shared about how embodied spirituality, this kind of approach, what that can mean about the healing power of our sacrament of communion. So let's be honest, we've inherited a kind of weird ritual where we eat bread and drink wine as a way of ingesting and metabolizing Jesus' broken and resurrected body. That's kind of strange if we're honest about it, right? Maybe don't think so. This is a strangely visceral ritual that I want to call it has a mystical power that can help us to receive unconditional love in and through our bodies in particular, as embodied beings that need to eat and drink. And this can help us to feel that unconditional love, embracing and healing the places especially of shame and brokenness in ourselves. So this is a practice of embodied spirituality that can honor our embodied and ensouled nature. So this week and next week, I would like to explore some of the ethical implications of this kind of embodied faith and embodied spirituality. What does it mean to be an ensouled body and an embodied soul living among other ensouled bodies and embodied souls? What does that mean for how we are to try to treat one another? So this week, let's talk about compassion. So an important ethical value in our faith is compassion, the value of being moved to help alleviate people's suffering. So what does that mean for how we are to treat each other when we realize that we're all ensouled bodies and embodied souls living in this world? We all share the same holy creator who made all of us and all of this and called it good. It means growing in our capacities for compassion and realizing that we're all, in our own ways, as embodied souls and ensouled bodies, tough and tender and broken and beautiful as fellow children of the living God. So in our scriptures, which we heard Chris offering, compassion is described as one of God's attributes in God's relationship with creation. And compassion is a common feature of how Jesus behaved We could have gone on and on and on with passages about Jesus showing compassion. Compassion is lifted up as something for us to aspire to in striving to live more in alignment with the Spirit. And let's be honest, it isn't easy. Compassion is nice to listen about and talk about, but it can be hard to do. Well, I'm not going to presume to speak for you again, but speaking for myself, it isn't always so easy, both near and far. Compassion can easily seem uncomfortable and inconvenient, thank you very much. And I, for one, am probably, an objective view of it, I'm pretty inconsistent. And I'm going to just take the chance that I'm not alone in that, if we're honest. So now, before I go any further, as a good Protestant, I have to give the Protestant disclaimer when we talk about ethics, which is that this isn't about trying to do the right thing and trying to be good in order to somehow earn rewards and favor and love for God. So that's not how it works in a Protestant Christian view. Rather, it's the other way around, where grace comes first. We receive unconditional love, regardless of merit, regardless of earning and deserving. And that helps us to grow in that grace. The more we allow that grace to embrace us, the more that can change us and help us to become free of the petty small self and realize that it's just good and true and right and beautiful to live in ways that are in alignment with this love nature of God. So we are, in fact, at the deepest level, made for compassion, and we don't always realize this. And it's one way to live out what is good and true and beautiful in ways that are deeply fulfilling. This isn't just about altruism of making ourselves miserable by just putting other people's needs ahead of ours, but this is deeply fulfilling to act in compassionate ways. And the interesting thing is it does in fact help to do what we know is the right thing, even if we aren't totally feeling like it. Compassion is the kind of thing you can fake it till you make it. The more we return to God's grace, the more we do end up genuinely wanting to do right by other people. And when we act in ways that are gracious and compassionate and loving, even if we aren't fully feeling it, even if there are parts of ourselves that complain about this because of the discomfort and the inconvenience of it, it does in fact help to loosen us up and strengthen the compassion muscles. And then we can become more aware of these urgings for compassion. Grace shapes us for compassion, and compassion shapes us for grace. And I am finding it helpful to recognize the embodied nature of compassion. So we heard from Chris as well that in our scripture readings, both the Hebrew and the Greek words that are translated as compassion have literally visceral roots. The Hebrew word is rooted in the word for womb. It's rechem. And the Greek word is rooted in the word for guts, intestines, bowels. And the word is splachnon. And that is a G with an X with an N in the middle without any vowels in between. So these aren't nice and pretty words. And rechem, that is, there's a these are tough and gritty words, right? The womb gives birth and is tough. And our guts get all the nutrients that it possibly can and then expel the bad stuff that we don't need. So compassion isn't just about being nice. This isn't just abstract. Compassion is about life-giving gutsiness. It's about being moved into action, moved in our guts. Compassion is about recognizing someone else's suffering and allowing that to pull us into it. So it's about both feeling and action. And there's research, contemporary psychology and neuroscience confirms this ancient wisdom of having gutsy words for compassion. When most people recognize somebody's suffering, there are parts of our brain and our bodies that respond sympathetically. There's mirror neurons. But what's important is what happens next. And that the healthiest thing, what is actually healthiest for us as organisms when we're distressed sympathetically, and also for ourselves too, by the way, is then when the kind of action process kicks in through our brain and our bodies. It gives us energy and motivation to do something in response to this distress. And this is what leads to compassion, both not just feeling sympathy and empathy, but also acting as a response out of that. Hopefully something that's actually helpful and upbuilding, but also even just running around the block can help. And psychological researchers who explore compassion find that the most resilient responses to this kind of stress are what they call broaden and build response, in which people seek to build cooperation and relationships in response to stress, rather than just fighting or fleeing, but broaden and build. And there's kind of brain research about how this is healthy. And this is as important now as ever, right? These days we have screens and cameras everywhere and satellites and fiber optic cables wrapping our globe, and we can be confronted with images of human anguish and devastation, both near and far, in nearly real time. And we can communicate with other humans across continents and oceans at slightly less than the speed of light. And yet, folks in our culture report feeling greater disconnection than ever. And we know that there's a lot of numbness and callousness and even cruelty. But can be, isn't it overwhelming to care? Right? And it can be a defense mechanism to just shut it down and numb it out. But it doesn't have to be. Responding with action and connection leads to a healthy response. And so I may not be, I'm distressed because of the wildfires in eastern Washington. And, we know folks are impacted by that. None of our folks have lost houses, thank God. But it's like, I would like to be able to really help and can't, really. You can send money, that is something. And it does help to go and do something else that's compassionate. And I can show up at my local food bank and push around a dolly of heavy food. And that's as important now as ever as well. There's increased need because of SNAP benefits going away and more folks losing their legal status overnight. So these concrete acts of actual service do in fact help us to stay healthy in the midst of distressing news and response. And I'm so grateful for all of the ways that you all here help to make that happen, through our community garden and through our relationships with Alianzas and through the meals at Old Firsts. Our sister congregation in Philly are starting up again, so other volunteer opportunities there, our relationship with the Franciscan Shelter and so forth. Acts of service actually help regulate our nervous systems, especially if they actually help others. And it's important to remember that as people of faith, we know we don't need to be alone in any of this. Both we have each other as communities, but also in a cosmic sense, we're not alone. The creator of the cosmos is the ultimate source of love and is actively present through the Spirit of love. And so we're not alone. When the writer of the book of Genesis tells the story about the first murder in history in this kind of mythological sense, when Cain killed Abel, the book of Genesis says that Abel's blood cried up from the ground, this visceral anguish, and it cut God's heart to the quick, like visceral anguish that the Creator felt because of this rupture. So God's heart is the first to break, to paraphrase William Sloane Coffin. Or you can say God is the most moved mover, in the words of Abraham Joshua Heschel, who is making a contrast with what Aristotle said, where God is the unmoved mover. Heschel said, no, if you look at the Hebrew prophets, they are talking about a God who is the most moved mover. And this means that we're not alone in having to care and bear the burden of heartbreak. God's self bears the world's heartbreak somehow. And this means that God can bear our own heartbreak, and knowing that and trusting that can help us to have the strength and the sensitivity to overcome numbness and disconnection and cynicism, and to do our part to bear each other's burdens. And the gifts of embodied spiritual practice in our religious life is that it can help us to slow down, and it can help us to reconnect with how it is with our souls, reconnect with how it is with our bodies. We can be aware and attentive of distress and tension and feeling of vitality as well. It can allow us to reconnect with our feelings and reconnect with each other, reconnect with the world around us, with all of our relations and interrelations, reconnect with the wisdom of those who have gone before us. And it can allow us to reconnect with our God, whose Spirit is among us and with us and beyond us. And all of this can give us strength to be moved by suffering into action. An action that creates connection between human beings in simple, clear, and concrete, life-giving and gutsy acts of service and in solidarity, in a real sense of we're all in this together. Because Lord knows that we are. We're all in this together. So thanks be to God.